That's for my ex. At least he can wear it, unlike you," she snapped, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard. She stood there, defiantly clutching the box of condoms she'd just pulled out of her shopping bag. The whole scene felt surreal. She had just come back from the market, her hair still slightly disheveled from a long day. I'd only noticed the shopping bag because it was there by the door, like an afterthought. And when I glanced inside, the last thing I expected to see was that small, black and gold box. I tried to shake off the sting from her words, but they hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, with that casual cruelty that sent a chill through me. I'd suspected for a while that things weren't quite right between us. The late nights at work, the new clothes she had bought recently, and her sudden interest in the gym had set off alarms in my mind. But whenever I questioned her, she laughed it off or brushed me aside, always with an easy excuse. But now, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Her answer was just too specific, too prepared, as if she'd thought it out before she walked in the door. I knew she wasn't the type to let things slip accidentally. I'll admit it's something I never wanted to talk about. Not with her, not with anyone. I'm 46, and for the past few years, I've been, well, let's just say not quite the man I once was. It started after a car accident 3 years ago. My truck got hit head-on by a teenager who'd just gotten his license, and I was lucky to make it out alive. I was laid up in a hospital bed for weeks, going through surgery after surgery. Metal rods in my leg, a fractured spine. Every day brought new complications. But it wasn't just physical. That accident changed everything. Before, I was strong, athletic, a man who could split wood in the backyard without thinking twice. But the trauma went deeper than the scars on my body. It was like something had been shut off inside of me. The doctors called it psychological impotence, saying that sometimes after a major trauma, the body just can't switch back on. It made me feel like a stranger in my own skin, like something essential had been taken from me. At first, I tried to brush it off, told myself that it'd get better with time. But weeks turned into months, and the months became years. Each failed attempt, each quiet night of her rolling away from me in bed, piled on like bricks. She tried to be patient, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. Eventually, it felt like she'd stopped trying altogether, like she'd moved on without me while I was still stuck there, lying on that hospital bed. It wasn't just the physical aspect, though. The accident took more than just my ability to perform. It took away my confidence, my self-worth. I started second-guessing myself at work, pulling back from friends, and most painfully from my own wife. Every day felt like another reminder of what I'd lost. So, when I found that box of condoms in her bag today, and she threw out that line about her ex, it was a gut punch in the cruelest sense. It was like she'd been keeping score, and I'd finally lost. Sharon and I had been married 6 years, but it felt like we'd crammed a lifetime of love and understanding into those years. We met after both of us had our fair share of heartbreak. My first marriage ended when my wife left, taking our daughter with her halfway across the country. We married young, with big dreams and no idea what it took to keep them alive. By the end, we barely spoke. When she packed up and moved out, I didn't even fight back. I was exhausted. Just let her go. We've been civil for our daughter's sake since then. She's 16 now and lives mostly with her mother, but we talk. Sometimes I wish things had been different, but I know I can't go back. Sharon had her own painful past. Her ex-husband, Paul, was a controlling man who chipped away at her self-worth over the years. She had 2 boys with him, both in their 20s now, and they mean the world to her. She fought tooth and nail to leave that man, to get out of that marriage with her dignity still intact. By the time we met, she was just starting to piece herself back together. I admired her strength, the way she had come through it all and still had hope in her eyes, still laughed easily. She wasn't jaded like I was. She was like a light in a dark room I didn't even know I'd been sitting in for years. When we married, I felt like I'd finally found my person, the woman who understood me without needing me to explain myself. We didn't want to complicate things with more kids. We were both in our 40s, had been through that journey already, and just wanted to focus on each other. It was peaceful, comfortable. Every Friday, we'd order pizza and watch a movie with her boys if they were around. We'd visit my daughter whenever she was in town, and Sharon made an effort to connect with her, even though she was a teenager and prickly around new people. It felt like we'd finally created this blended family, patched together with bits of our past but moving forward together. But then came the accident. The week leading up to it had been a good one. Sharon and I were planning a little getaway to the coast, a place we'd both loved as kids. We were going to leave early Friday morning, make a long weekend of it. But on Wednesday, that kid and his dad's pickup slammed into my truck. I barely remember the impact. Just waking up in a hospital bed, my body held together with metal and stitches. Sharon was there, of course, sitting in that uncomfortable hospital chair every single day. She brought me coffee from my favorite cafe, read out loud from whatever book she was reading, and took my grumpiness in stride. She was everything a man could ask for. She even arranged her schedule to work remotely, so she could be there for me as much as possible. As I healed, though, things changed. The physical toll was obvious. The way I limped for months, the endless rounds of physical therapy, the way I'd flinch when I got in a car again. But the hardest part was what it did to my mind, to my sense of self. Suddenly, I was unable to perform like I used to. Every attempt felt like I was letting Sharon down. I tried to play it off, make excuses, but she knew. She'd give me that soft smile, tell me not to worry, but her patience only made me feel worse. I knew she needed more, deserved more than what I could give her. I started to feel like she was doing me a favor just by sticking around. That's when I started noticing little things, the kind of things you ignore when you're feeling secure, but that gnaw at you when you're not. She began going out with her friends more often, coming back later and later. There were new outfits she never wore around the house, dresses I hadn't seen before, tucked into the back of her closet like secrets. She started spending more time at the gym. I tried to ignore it, to push down that nagging feeling, but it got harder every day. She'd get calls late at night and say they were work calls, but her answers were too brief, her laughter too bright. It felt like she was drifting away from me, and I had no way to pull her back. I told myself I was imagining things. Sharon was loyal, grounded. She knew what it was like to be betrayed, just like I did. She wouldn't do that to me. But then again, we weren't who we used to be. I wasn't the man she'd married. Hell, half the time, I didn't feel like much of a man at all. I stood there, my head spinning as I held that ridiculous box of condoms, still processing her answer. That's for my ex. At least he can wear it. Unlike you. She looked at me, half challenging, half apologetic, but she didn't take it back. It felt like a gut punch, and I was still trying to catch my breath, hoping she'd follow it up with a laugh or a smile. But she didn't. Instead, her face softened for a second, like she was on the verge of explaining, maybe even apologizing. But then something in her seemed to snap. She squared her shoulders, crossed her arms, and her mouth twisted in that tight, angry way I hadn't seen in years. I tried to convince myself it was just an impulsive joke gone wrong, but she kept going. "Do you have any idea," she started, her voice low and trembling with frustration, "any idea what it's like to live like this? To feel ignored? Do you think it's easy for me? You've just been sitting there, letting things fall apart, like none of it even matters." Her voice caught as she forced herself to hold back. "I've endured this for so long, hoping you'd get better, or that you'd try. But it's like you've just given up." The truth hit me hard. She wasn't joking, or at least not entirely. And I could tell she'd been holding this in for a long time. "So what? You're saying you'd rather be with your ex? Is that what this is?" I asked, my voice cracking as I forced the words out. She'd never even mentioned Paul since we got married. He was ancient history, as far as I'd known. She looked away, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not saying that exactly," she said, her voice quieter but still sharp. "I left Paul for a reason, but at least I didn't feel invisible back then. I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is easy for me. You don't even try anymore. You've just—" She stopped, studying my face, and when I didn't answer, she shook her head. "Look, I'm going to the birthday party tomorrow. I want to be there for my son, and I can't handle all this right now. Maybe we can talk when I get back." I don't know. As I struggled to process her words, Sharon let out a frustrated sigh, reaching over to take the box of condoms from my hands. "They're just a gag gift, all right? It's for Paul. He's dating every woman in town, and I thought it'd be funny to throw these in with his birthday present tomorrow." She paused, watching my reaction as if she expected me to laugh it off, to find it as harmless as she apparently did. But I couldn't. The sting was still too fresh, her words about me still echoing painfully. "That's your idea of a joke?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow even to me. "Buying condoms for your ex, knowing things are the way they are between us? You had to know how it would come across." Sharon looked away, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Look," she muttered, exasperation tightening her jaw. It was just supposed to be a funny little thing. I didn't mean for you to see it, all right? But maybe it's not just about him, or the gift, or whatever. I'm just so tired, Tired of all of it. I've tried to be patient, but it feels like I'm living with a ghost. I'm still here, still trying, and it's like you've just shut off. Her words hit like a second blow. I haven't shut off, Sharon, I said quietly, my voice laced with more hurt than anger. I'm here, I'm trying. Hell, I've been trying since the accident. But it's not like I could just flip a switch and go back to how things were. And what am I supposed to do in the meantime? She shot back, her voice rising. Just sit here, feeling ignored? Watching you drift further away every day, waiting for something to change? You think it's easy for me? Watching you turn into this shadow of yourself. She looked down, shaking her head. I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to pretend like I don't care. But I'm tired of putting on a brave face. Paul may have been a mistake, but at least with him I felt, like a real person, not invisible. Sharon, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Are you saying you want out? She didn't answer right away. She closed her eyes, breathing in slowly. I don't know what I'm saying, she said at last. I just know that I can't live like this forever. And tomorrow, it's my son's birthday. I want to be there for him. I need to be there. I don't want to keep dragging this out when we're both miserable. I watched her walk to the stairs, feeling that cold, unfamiliar distance between us grow wider with each step. She was going to see her ex tomorrow, the father of her son, and she was bringing him a joke that felt anything but funny. As she disappeared up the stairs, it was like a part of our marriage went with her. And all I could do was stand there, wondering if maybe, in some quiet, reluctant way, she'd already left. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Sharon bustling around the house. She was getting ready for her younger son's birthday party, and I could hear her moving quickly between the bedroom, bathroom, and closet. She hadn't said a word to me since last night, and the silence felt like a wall between us. When she finally came downstairs, dressed in a new dress I'd never seen before, something fitted with a deep neckline, I felt that familiar twist in my chest. She looked good, a bit too good if I'm honest. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled in soft waves. There was a glint in her I hadn't seen in months, maybe even longer. It reminded me of the early days when she'd dress up for me, when we'd go out on dates, laugh over glasses of wine, talk about anything and everything like we had all the time in the world. But now that look, that spark, was directed somewhere else. It stung in a way I hadn't expected. I cleared my throat, heading out. She didn't even glance up from her purse as she tossed in her phone, her wallet, and, of course, that box of condoms. She'd wrapped them up in bright, playful paper, as if this was all just some innocent joke. Yes, I told you I'd be at Paul's for the day. It's my son's birthday, and I don't want him to feel like things are weird between his dad and me. Her tone was casual, like we hadn't just had one of the most uncomfortable confrontations of our marriage less than 12 hours ago. So, that's it? You're just going to spend the day with him and pretend everything's fine? I tried to keep my voice steady, but there was no hiding the edge in it. She finally looked up, and for a moment, something like guilt flashed in her eyes. I don't know what you want me to say. Honestly, I'm going to be there for my son. That's all. The gift is just a joke, something to lighten the mood. Don't make this into something it's not. Her voice was softer now, almost pleading, as if she wanted me to just let it go, to forget about the night before. But the wound was too fresh, and I wasn't ready to let it go. Fine, I said, biting back everything else I wanted to say. Do what you need to do. She gave me a small nod, but as she reached for the door, she paused. For a moment, I thought she might turn around, say something to make it right, to show me that I still mattered. But instead, she just looked at me over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. I'll be back tonight. Don't wait up. And with that, she was gone. The hours that followed felt like an eternity. I tried distracting myself, puttering around the house, going through my usual routine, but my mind kept drifting back to her, to the way she looked as she left, to that damn joke she'd stuffed into her bag. I couldn't shake the image of her at Paul's house, surrounded by people who'd known her and him as a couple, laughing at old memories, reminiscing. What did I have to hold on to here? I was the guy left behind, the guy she could barely look at, and he was the ex who still had a place in her life, even after everything. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I'd made a promise to myself never to stoop so low, but desperation and doubt make a man do things he'd never imagine. I found her laptop in the den, the one she used for work and social media, and sat down in front of it. I opened it, not really knowing what I was looking for, maybe hoping I wouldn't find anything at all. But as her inbox loaded, my pulse quickened. There, near the top, was an email chain with Paul. The subject line was something innocuous, just the name of their son and the party details. But as I scrolled, I felt my heart sink. Paul, looking forward to seeing you again. It's been too long. Glad we're able to do this together for him. Sharon, me too. I think it's good for us, don't you? I want him to see that his parents are still a team. Paul, a team, huh? Maybe like old times. And then, at the very end of the thread, a message from Sharon from just 2 nights ago. Maybe. I guess we'll see. It felt like a blow to the stomach. A team, like old times? And her, leaving that door open with a maybe? The implication hung there, heavy and undeniable. I couldn't tell if I was angrier at him for testing those waters or at her for not shutting him down. And then there was the see you soon part. She hadn't mentioned any of this to me, hadn't even told me they were talking beyond the arrangements for the party. The hours dragged on after that. I paced the house, trying to make sense of it all, hoping I'd read too much into things, but feeling that sick, familiar suspicion gnawing at me. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew this was more than just a friendly chat about their son's birthday. Evening crept in, and with each passing hour, the silence in the house grew heavier. I tried to push down the gnawing worry, telling myself she'd come home soon and I'd get the answers I needed. Maybe I'd misread things. Maybe she'd come back, laugh off the messages, and tell me I was overthinking it. But that hope was slipping away with each minute that ticked by. The house, once filled with warmth, felt empty, like I was a guest in my own life. Finally, around 10:30, I heard her car pull into the driveway. My pulse quickened, a knot forming in my stomach. I hadn't thought through what I'd say, but I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The door creaked open, and Sharon stepped in, glancing around, maybe surprised to see me still up, waiting. "Oh," she said, closing the door behind her and setting her bag on the entryway table. She looked exhausted, her makeup faded and her hair slightly out of place. "You're still awake." I nodded, crossing my arms. "Yeah, I wanted to talk." My tone must have hinted at the storm brewing under the surface because she frowned, her expression turning guarded. "About what?" she asked, almost too casually, slipping off her shoes and trying to avoid my eyes. She headed toward the kitchen, probably looking for an escape or a distraction, but I followed her, determined to get this out in the open. "About today. About the joke, if that's what you want to call it. And about you and Paul." She paused, her hand halfway to the fridge, and looked at me with an exasperated sigh. "I told you it was just a present for fun. He's been on all these dates, and it's become a running joke between us. He even laughed when he opened it. There's nothing more to it than that." "Is that really all there is?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Because I saw the emails, Sharon. The maybe you threw at him. The see you soon. That doesn't exactly sound like you're just co-parenting." I could see my words hit her, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock, then something closer to anger. "You went through my emails?" she said, her voice cold. "That's what this is about." "No," I replied, my voice tightening. "This is about me watching you drift away, about how I feel like I'm losing you to someone who's supposed to be part of your past, not your present. And it's about you not even trying to reassure me." Her jaw clenched, and she dropped her gaze, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "Do you think this is easy for me?" she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think I wanted it to be like this? Watching you become someone I barely recognize, feeling like you're slipping away from me just as much as I am from you? Paul, he's just been there for me. He's seen me at my worst, and sometimes, yeah, it's easier to talk to him. But I didn't want it to be like this between us." "Then why didn't you talk to me?" I asked, the frustration breaking through. "Why didn't you tell me you felt this way? Instead, you're laughing with him, joking around, and leaving me here in the dark." She shook her head, biting her lip, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Because every time I tried, it felt like you weren't even there. Like you'd already checked out. I didn't know how to get through to you. And Paul, he just what?" I demanded, my voice sharp. He just made you feel wanted? Like you matter? Is that it? She didn't answer, but the silence said more than her words ever could. I felt a pang of jealousy mixed with something darker, the bitter taste of betrayal creeping in. All those moments I caught her smiling at her phone, the times she'd stayed out later than usual, all of it started to fall into place, painting a picture I didn't want to see. So, what happens now, Sharon? I asked, my voice heavy. Are you saying you want him back? That you'd rather be with him than work things out with me? Her face softened for a moment, the anger fading into something like sadness. She took a shaky breath, her eyes glistening. I don't know what I want, she whispered, looking down. I know that I love you, but things aren't working. I feel like we're just going through the motions, like we're both waiting for something to change, but too afraid to do anything about it. The words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. She was right. Part of me had been afraid that if I tried and failed, I'd lose her anyway. But hearing her say it out loud, hearing that she didn't know if she wanted me anymore, it was almost unbearable. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision looming over us. If you don't know if you want me, Sharon, then maybe you've already made your choice. In the weeks that followed, things between Sharon and me went from tense to barely existent. Conversations turned into strained exchanges, and most nights we barely looked at each other. I started sleeping on the couch more often than not, and even when we were in the same room, it felt like there was an invisible wall between us. I tried to focus on work, throwing myself into long days and late hours just to avoid being at home. Coming back to an empty feeling house where the woman I'd loved, the woman I still loved despite everything, was slipping away felt like torture. I could tell Sharon had noticed. She'd glance at me sometimes like she wanted to say something to break the silence, but the words never came. And I couldn't bring myself to ask her anything, afraid of what she might say. Then one Thursday, I left work early, feeling drained from the constant tension and lack of sleep. My boss had noticed something was off with me and insisted I go home, get some rest. Part of me dreaded going back to that silent, suffocating house, but I told myself I'd try to talk to her, that maybe, somehow, we could get back to how things were. When I pulled up to the house, I noticed another car parked out front, a black sedan I didn't recognize at first. But as I got closer, my heart sank. It was Paul's, his car right there in my driveway. A sick feeling churned in my stomach, my hands clenching as I approached the door, each step heavier than the last. I unlocked the front door, stepping inside as quietly as I could, the air thick with an uncomfortable silence. I could hear soft voices coming from the living room, hushed but unmistakable. My heart pounded as I turned the corner, and there they were. Paul was already putting on his coat, adjusting the collar as he stood by the door, his face slightly flushed, beads of sweat visible on his brow. Sharon was standing a few feet away, her own face red, looking rattled. They both turned at the sound of my footsteps, their eyes widening in surprise, guilt flashing across their faces. Hey, I said, barely able to keep the edge out of my voice. I looked at Paul, who seemed to freeze, one hand still on his collar. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Sharon just stood there, staring at me, her face paling as she realized she'd been caught. What's going on? I asked, trying to sound calm, though every instinct told me something had just crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Paul cleared his throat, glancing awkwardly at Sharon, then back at me. I just stopped by to drop off something for Sharon, he said, his voice shaky, the lies so transparent I almost laughed. Drop off something? I repeated, my eyes narrowing. Is that what you call it? I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. I glanced between the two of them, noticing the way Sharon was fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly tousled. And then there was the unmistakable sheen of sweat on both of them. Listen, man, I was just leaving, Paul said quickly, his voice filled with false casualness. He took a step toward the door, but I blocked his way, planting myself firmly in front of him. Oh, I bet you were, I said, looking him straight in the eye. But I think maybe it's time we all had a talk. Sharon finally found her voice, stepping forward with her hands up like she was trying to calm me down. It's not what you think, she said, her voice shaky, barely above a whisper. Paul just came by to check in on me, that's all. To check in on you? I repeated, my anger barely contained. And he needed to be here alone, in our house, while I was at work. Look at the two of you. You're both sweating, red-faced. What do you take me for? Paul stammered. I really should get going. I don't want to cause any trouble. He tried to push past me, but I grabbed him by the shoulder, gripping tighter than I probably should have. Oh, but you already have. I hissed, my voice cold. I let go of his shoulder, stepping back just enough to let him leave, but my stare made it clear I didn't want him setting foot in my house ever again. Paul looked to Sharon one last time, then ducked his head and made a quick exit, slamming the door behind him. Once he was gone, I turned to Sharon, who looked like she wanted to disappear. Her face was pale, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for the right words. But there were no words that could fix this. Not now. Not after seeing him here, in my house, with that look of guilt smeared all over his face. So, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, how long has this been going on? She looked down, twisting her hands together, a tear slipping down her cheek. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she managed, her voice breaking. I didn't want this to happen. You didn't want it to happen? I laughed bitterly, feeling the anger and betrayal surge through me. Then what the hell was he doing here, Sharon? What was he doing with you while I was at work? She took a shaky breath, finally meeting my eyes. I don't know, she whispered. I was lonely, and he's always been there. I never thought it would go this far. I swear it just happened. Just happened. I repeated, feeling the full weight of her words crush me. All the suspicions, the late nights, the jokes, the little secrets, all of it, right there staring me in the face. I shook my head, feeling more defeated than angry now. You know, if you were unhappy, if you wanted out, you could have just told me. You didn't have to do this. Not with him. Not like this. My voice broke, and I swallowed hard, trying to hold on to the last shreds of my dignity. She looked at me, a mix of regret and shame etched into her face. I know. I should have. I just didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, you did. I said quietly, my voice empty. And now I don't even know who you are anymore. The room fell silent. The only sound, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. For the first time in our marriage, I realized I might actually be losing her. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I even wanted to fight to keep her. After Paul left and Sharon retreated upstairs, I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. My head was throbbing, heart pounding with a mix of anger, betrayal, and sheer disbelief. The house felt foreign, like I'd stumbled into someone else's life, a stranger's life where I no longer belonged. Sharon's words replayed in my head, hollow and cold. I didn't want it to happen. It just did. I thought I'd hit rock bottom. I thought nothing could hurt worse than watching her and Paul, both red-faced and flustered, as she stammered out excuses about their friendship. But later that night, I found out how wrong I was. It was after midnight, and I couldn't sleep. I'd been lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing in 1,000 different directions, my thoughts twisting like a knife in my gut. I finally got up, deciding maybe a splash of cold water would clear my head, or at least dull the pounding anger I couldn't shake. I walked down the hall toward the bathroom, flipping on the light. I splashed water on my face, gripping the edge of the sink, trying to steady myself. And that's when I noticed it, a small, crumpled wrapper peeking out of the trash can by the sink. I didn't want to look. God, I wanted to turn away, pretend I hadn't seen it, let myself live in the last shreds of denial. But my hand moved before I could stop it, reaching down and pulling the edge of the trash bag open, and there it was, the used condom, rolled up and discarded, as if it were nothing more than an afterthought. I felt a rush of nausea, my mind racing back to that gag gift she'd given Paul, to her casual dismissal of it as just a joke. But now the joke was on me. No, it was worse than that. This wasn't a joke. This was a punchline to a story I'd been too blind or too trusting to see coming. The reality of it sank in slow and sickening. The condom wasn't a relic of some forgotten night from our past, something left over from better days. No, it was fresh, recent, proof of something undeniable, something I'd already feared but hadn't been ready to face. They hadn't just been talking. They hadn't just been friends. Paul had been here in our house, doing exactly what I'd accused her of, while I was at work trying to hold our life together. She was here with him, tearing it apart. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the sink to keep from falling as a wave of rage surged through me. Every single lie she'd told, the reassurances that it's just a joke, The "you're overthinking it," it all came crashing down, every word now drenched in deceit. I don't remember leaving the bathroom, don't remember walking down the hall to the bedroom, but there I was, standing in the doorway, looking at her lying in bed, her back to me. She must have heard me come in because she rolled over, blinking in surprise, her face a mix of guilt and exhaustion. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she could already feel the storm coming. Without a word, I held up the condom wrapper, my hand trembling, the rage barely contained. Her face drained of color, and she sat up, the sheet clutched to her chest as she looked between the wrapper and me, eyes wide and panicked. "Sharon," I said, my voice breaking. "Tell me, was this part of the joke? Because if it is, it's the sickest damn joke I've ever seen." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, frozen in fear, guilt written all over her face. "Tell me," I shouted, my voice echoing through the room, harsh and raw. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been using our home, our bed for this?" Tears welled in her eyes, but they only fueled my anger. I never meant for you to find out," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was just once, I swear. It just happened, one mistake. One mistake." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "That's what you call it? Inviting him into our home. Using that," I gestured to the wrapper in my hand, "in our bathroom like it's nothing? That's a mistake." She looked down, her face streaked with tears, hands trembling as she clutched the sheets. "I'm sorry," she choked out, but the words sounded hollow, meaningless, like an apology she thought would make everything disappear. "You're sorry," I spat, the anger boiling over. "Sorry that you got caught, or sorry that you betrayed me with him. Of all people?" Silence fell, thick and suffocating, as she sat there, unable to meet my gaze. In that moment, I felt everything fall away. The love I'd clung to, the memories I cherished, the future I'd hoped we'd still have. It was all gone, buried under the weight of her betrayal. I turned and left the room, ignoring her calls after me, her pleas for me to listen, to let her explain. But I didn't want to hear it anymore. I was done listening, done waiting for an excuse that would make this hurt any less. There was nothing left to say, nothing that could salvage the wreckage of what we'd once been. As I walked down the stairs and out the door, I realized that I'd lost something far deeper than just a marriage. I'd lost every bit of trust, every ounce of faith I'd had in the person I thought I knew. And now, all I had left was the bitter truth, that the life I'd built with her, the love I thought we shared, had been nothing more than a lie. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.